Hello and welcome back. As you know, yesterday we finished up the pig hunt, and in case you were a little bit confused about the ending, like I told you, there was a little ship on deck, a little boat, and it was covered. And Cut-Eye Higgins got into the boat because he wanted to row to shore and escape to Brazil. And I don't really know how he got in the boat and didn't see the pig because it's a tiny little boat, but in any case, the boat got lowered down to the water. Cut-Eye Higgins started rowing away, and with him in the boat was the pig, and he must have figured, whatever. So when Cut-Eye Higgins got onto land and escaped, then Good Luck the pig got onto land and escaped also, and was able to start a new life in Brazil, away from the cook. All right, this next chapter is called Land of Fire. The days grew shorter. The Lady Wilma beat her way toward the tip of South America, and summer faded quickly from the sea. So if you can picture that this is the globe, and there they started here in Boston, and then they went past the equator, and then they went into the southern hemisphere where it's summer, and now they're going almost close to Antarctica. So again, you can see that this part is closest to the sun, so it's very hot, summer, and at the very tip furthest away from the sun, so even though it might be summer in the southern latitudes, it's still going to be pretty cool here. All right, Willow just entered and opened the door herself. And you can probably hear her crying. All right, we'll just ignore her. Anyway, so they're getting to the bottom of the earth, and it's starting to get cold. Jack, who had been going barefoot for weeks to keep cool, now put his shoes on to keep warm. The gold seekers put away their straw hats and dug in their sea chests for their woolen underwear. Off the coast of Patagonia, Jack awoke to find 6 inches of snow on deck and a school of whales off the starboard bow. Soon the passengers were huddled up in great cocoons of clothing. The men looked like fat ones, and the fat men looked enormous. For days, Praiseworthy and Jack watched the crew tighten the riggings and check the canvas against the coming winds and the crushing seas of Cape Horn. An air of impending adventure ran through the ship. Jack listened to tales of whaling ships disappearing forever from the roaring cape, of square riggers with their masts uprooted like trees, of boats driven back by horrendous winds, and of barks wandering in endless fogs. So this is the weather they're going into right now as they round the bottom of South America called Cape Horn. It is really, really, really bad weather and dangerous for ships. All right. Nonsense, said Praiseworthy. Mere sea yarns, stories. But even more forbidding, it seemed to Jack, were stories told of sea captains tempted by a shorter route to the Pacific, through the narrow and vile-tempered Strait of Magellan. There, ships were sometimes cracked in two like nuts between the rocky jaws of the passage. More than one brave captain had turned back for the tender mercies of Cape Horn herself. Stuff and nonsense, Praiseworthy would say, even though he believed every word of it. We may hit a bit of inclement weather, gentlemen, but our good captain will give the back of his hand to the Cape. He told me himself why the wild bull of the seas could navigate these waters with his eyes shut. Well, said Mr. Azariah Jones, I hope he doesn't try that. It'll suit me fine if he keeps both eyes open, and some more. The mountainous Yankee trader wore a muffler around his face, as if he had a toothache, to keep his ears warm. In the pilot house, Captain Swain studied his charts. The Sea Raven was obviously far in the lead, but San Francisco was yet a long way off. Captain Swain knew well enough the storms lying in wait for them around the Cape. Winds that could drive a ship back 20 miles for every one it gained. Nevertheless, the nearer the Lady Wilma crept to the tip of the continent, the more eager Captain Swain became. They were waters to test a sailor's skill. Praiseworthy, who was not born to adventure, was surprised to find it decidedly to his liking. His face was weathering. On good days and bad, he took his brisk laps around the deck and enjoyed the sting of the sea on his cheeks. "I must admit," he said to Jack, "that I'm rather keen on having a look at the notorious Cape. You might watch for the fires." "Fires?" said Jack, attempting to keep up with Praiseworthy's long stride. "At Tierra del Fuego. The captain tells me the natives keep great fires going day and night. Keep themselves and their sheep from freezing. Tierra del Fuego, land of fire. That's what the name means." A burst of spray rose from the bows and fell like rain. "Land of fire," said Jack. "I'll watch for it." Almost without warning, the first storms came roaring off the Arctic waters and bore down on the paddle wheeler. The sun went out like a match. Long, shrieking winds, loaded with hailstones, struck the ship like buckshot. The oak wheel spun out of the hands of the quartermaster. The Lady Wilma went teetering over on her side, dragging her ribs deep into the sea. So I know we've talked a lot about visualizing. So everything has been calm, it's been sunny, and then suddenly they're going around the bottom of Cape Horn. It's freezing and the weather is extreme. So I want you to keep picturing this. They said it's super windy, there's hailstones, the ship now is like on its side. Jack, who had just sat down to a bowl of chowder, saw the bowl fly off in one direction, the chowder in another, and the spoon in a third. "I do believe we've arrived at the Cape," said Praiseworthy. Captain Swain lent a hand to the wheel, righting the ship and turning her bowsprit into the wind. In the main saloon, the gold seekers had been thrown together in a tangle of arms and legs. No sooner did they unravel themselves when another violent lurch of the ship knotted them over together again. The ship's bell rang in the wind. Howling blasts ripped off the tops of the waves. Riding the swells, the Lady Wilma seemed to climb halfway into the sky, only to drop with a crash into the troughs. Jack got wild glimpses of the sea through a porthole, and if he was afraid, he was too busy hanging on to give it much thought. The side wheeler burrowed into the storm. Seawater came rushing along the decks and slipped down the hatches like so many waterfalls. Sailors in their stocking caps were busy everywhere, battening the hatches and taking in every rag of canvas. "A mere squall," said Praiseworthy. "Why, in these latitudes, this is considered a fine spring day, I believe." The weather lasted more than a week. Wow, can you imagine that? For a day or two, seabirds came out of the sky and rode along the top of the ship. The gold seekers emerged from their cabins, bruised and sleepless and hungry. Some said it was harder to eat than sleep, and others said it was harder to sleep than eat. But hardly had the seas calmed when another gale burst from the sky. Captain Swain no longer left the pilot house. The nights were now 16 hours long, and that's because they're at the bottom of the earth and they're getting very little sunlight, so just a teeny bit of daylight. So the nights were 16 hours long, and the days a mere glimmer of light. The Lady Wilma continued westing, fighting for every foot of water. Her paddle wheels thrashed hour after hour and day after day. Being experienced hands, Praiseworthy and Jack helped keep the fire roaring in the furnace. Despite the crash and thunder of the sea, the butler seemed unafraid, and Jack found comfort in being at his side. Whale oil lamps flickered in the passageways day and night, and it was hard to tell one from another. The nights were the worst. Jack's hammock swayed, and the cabin walls swung. If Mr. Azariah Jones wasn't pitched out of his bunk, it was Dr. Buckbee. More than once, Mountain Jim awoke to find them both sprawled across him. "I've known grizzly bears that were a mite friendlier than this billy-be-hanged Cape Horn." Headwinds battled the paddle-wheeler to a complete standstill, and Jack began to wonder if they would ever reach the Pacific. The Lady Wilma was thrashing with all of her steam to stay in one place. But then a calm would set in, like a great practical joke. The moment passengers began to snore in their cabins, fresh winds would swoop down and jerk the ship awake. "There'll be nothing to do but sleep when we reach the Pacific," Praiseworthy pointed out. The portholes were almost frozen over, and only once did Jack get a glimpse of land. Dark cliffs seemed to hang like draperies from the misty sky, and then the weather closed in again, and they were gone. "Do you think there's any chance we might catch up with the Sea Raven?" We could pass within 100 yards of each other without knowing it." We can't get to San Francisco soon enough to suit me," said Mr. Azariah Jones. "I hope we win," said Jack. "I don't think Captain Swain has the slightest intention of losing," said Praiseworthy. For 37 days, the side-wheeler battered and rammed her way through crashing headwinds that attempted to drive her back. And then, on a Tuesday morning, the sun broke out clear and sharp and hung like an ornament in the northern sky. One by one, the deck hatches opened, and the gold seekers came on deck, as if from some dark dungeon. Their eyes blinked in the unfamiliar brightness of day. "We've made it!" yelled Mountain Jim, throwing down his yellow cap. "Boy, this here's the Pacific Ocean." A yell went up around the ship, and Captain Swain leaned out of the pilot house. His beard had grown an inch. He gave a hearty wave, and then came out on the paddle box with his long glass. After a moment of sweeping the seas, he stopped. "By grabs!" he roared. "There she is, the Sea Raven! And she's behind us!" Another yell went up, and the gold seekers rushed to the afterdeck for a look. There was the Sea Raven, indeed, trailing far behind. It seemed to Jack the most exciting moment of his life. "A remarkable performance," said Praiseworthy, but then he was baffled. It seemed hardly possible that the Lady Wilma had charged ahead against the furies of the past 37 days, and yet there stood the Sea Raven behind them as proof. "I watched for the fires," said Jack, "but I never did catch sight of them, Praiseworthy." Suddenly the butler's eyes lit up. "Why, Master Jack, you've solved it." "Solved what?" "You didn't see the fires of Tierra del Fuego?" "Because they weren't to be seen." "But you said—" "I mean to say the fires were there, but we weren't." At that moment, Captain Swain had joined the gold seekers on the deck. Jack had never seen him with such a wide and merry grin glowing from the depths of his whiskers. "I hope you gentlemen enjoyed your passage around the Horn," said the wild bull of the seas. "Captain," Praiseworthy said with a gleam in his eye, "Master Jack appears to be on to your secret." "What's that?" "We haven't been around the Horn, sir." Captain Swain gave Jack a twinkling glance. "Is that so, lad?" "All I said was, what he means to say is that you have pulled off a most daring piece of seamanship. The reason Master Jack didn't catch sight of the great fires at Land's End, why, the reason, sir, is that you took the Lady Wilma through the deadly Strait of Magellan." "The Strait of Magellan, you say?" The captain rubbed his plump nose. "Why, that's a regular ship's graveyard." And then he gave Jack a heavy squint. "Of course, it cuts hundreds of miles off the voyage around the Horn. Hundreds of miles. A ship's master can be sorely tempted." "You mean to say, sir," said Mr. Azariah Jones, "that we've been bouncing around in that awful place?" "I confess, the lad here has found me out." And then he pointed to the Sea Raven. "Look at her, following us gentlemen, like a chick after a hen. And that is the end of the chapter. And I'm just going to draw something for you really quick so that you can understand. Okay, so here's South America. Here's Antarctica. Here's North America, where they came from. Here's the equator. So their ship came down here, past the equator, past Brazil, and this is Cape Horn. This is the Atlantic Ocean. This is the Pacific Ocean. And this is the part here that has all the horrible, horrible weather. But actually, if you were to look really close, the land is not continuous right here. It's a very thin little passageway. This is called the Strait of Magellan. And they said, if this is dangerous, this part is even more dangerous because it's so narrow and so stormy that you could get pushed against rocks. But Captain Swain decided to go through the Strait of Magellan. So when he came out, the Sea Raven had taken this route. So this is why this is the Lady Wilma, and now this is the Sea Raven. So they were able to get ahead by taking a really dangerous shortcut through the Strait of Magellan. All right, see you next time.